on the bilateral deals, Dan, there's no such thing as one bilateral deal of this significance done in 90 days. They're trying to build a process, Susie Wiles and Treasury, Commerce, USDR. They're trying to organize a process by which they could do more than maybe 100 bilateral deals, maybe not to finality, but to a shape where after 90 days they could say there's an agreement in principle. The Wall Street Journal and Politico both have pieces today casting doubt from the experts, saying it's impossible to do that.
But yeah,
But
Mark, I will say this. I read those stories, and as someone who actually spent 3 years at USTR dealing with these, there's a difference between an FTA, which is a free trade agreement, or a bilateral deal like a Doha or a TPP, than reducing tariff schedules. That's not a trade. I mean, that is a completely, and they are misleading the American public as to what's actually happening. And so, as much as the Brit that's running Politico's playbook
yeah.
now has zero trade experience, the idea that aside from maybe visiting a duty free, the idea that these people have any clue what it takes to make a trade deal is somewhat laughable.
But are you saying that in the 90 days there'll be no non-tariff issues addressed?
No, I do think on the non-tariff barrier issues, there can be some agreement because it's very specific. I think it's a, here's what, and I mean, for example, in the EU case, I don't think you're going to resolve GMOs or the VAT, but those are much, I mean, you can take down there are some very basic things that prevent market access in places like India and some Southeast Asian countries that you could easily say, if you get rid of this, we're taking our tariff down. Remember, this isn't a bilateral trade agreement, is them wanting to seek further access in our market, us wanting to do this.
Yeah.
This is us saying you need to take yours down.
Right. So if Susie, hold on one second. I just want to ask one more question. If Susie Wiles asked you for advice, how would you organize this? Would you basically give Scott Besson a list and Lutnick a list and Greer a list?
They probably have the list. I mean, it's not hard.
No,
to
but I mean, in terms of
schedule.
dividing up the work, like who's at the table with the other countries?
Well, I mean, I think part of this is you want sort of unanimity when it comes to what is it that we're asking from each country. It's sort of like we want you to take your tariff down, your overall tariff down.
I'm asking you
Hold on, no, no, but
I'm
that
asking
no,
a
no,
much
but
more quotidian question. How do you organize 70 plus
no, but
negotiations?
that's exactly what I'm answering you. Is that part of this is to have an agreement on as to what we're doing, and then you can farm it out. But if you can't have Lutnick out there saying, "Okay, I'll cut a deal on your non-tariff barriers, and you can go halfway on your tariff," there has to be agreement as to what it is the goal is, and then basically empower. I think USTR's got to be in the lead on this, but Treasury's going to take a big lead, and then maybe throw a little to Commerce. But part of this, more than anything, you can't have three people cutting different deals. There has to be an agreement as to what the process looks like, so that what the number one goal is to take the tariff rate down. The number two goal is, in some of these countries, not all non-tariff barriers are created equal. And that's the problem, is that emission standards, GMO access, things like that are very different than a lot of these other smaller, even customs can be a huge barrier to entry in some of these countries where they delay. And if you're talking about fresh fruit or something like that, sitting in a customs warehouse for 90 days is death.
Dan.
So I worked on trade with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on the Panama, Colombia, and South Korea free trade agreements 13 years ago. I think the challenge is...
I'm sorry, hold on just a minute. While Dan's talking, put up CNBC because Jamie Dimon's talking. Go ahead, Dan.
Sure. I think what they're going to do is simple stuff. And I think, to Sean's point, they're going to have to go into this declaring what is like the one headline that we want for each trade deal. Because the problem is, and this is why I bring up the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I sat there with ag and pharma and tech and Caterpillar, the airlines, the banks, the insurance companies. Everyone's got their issues in these trade deals with each specific country or block, depending on how they do this. That's why these things take so long, because we have all of our industry and all of our companies that have their issues, and so does your counterpart, and they have their domestic politics and their hot button issues, and working that through a system takes time. So I think, and this is why I said this yesterday, they'll be very simple. I think they'll seek one headline. The problem is they are going to piss off all the losers because they don't have the time, the bandwidth, or I think, frankly, right now, the balls to go through this with every industry in every country.